Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to come and speak. I thank Lloyd, and I think you have a new executive director you've just announced, so congratulations to him as well, and congratulations. So I'm going to talk very briefly today about infrastructure, but educational infrastructure. And I have a very focused mission in school facilities, along with this commission and the department. We are focused on one thing: building the world's best public schools, designing and building the world's best public schools here in the state of Wyoming. And we've got a really good start, and are at a place now where the program, the infrastructure program that we're working on, is transitioning, and I'll talk a little bit about that today. So I have a button here that I'm going to push, and we hope it works. Okay, good. We've been doing some research lately in terms of this transition, and we took all of a number of different data sources here from Wyoming, and then exported it to the rest of the United States, and then brought on a consulting firm out of Washington, D.C. And they began the process, and they've been doing this for a little while. They began the process of looking at infrastructure investments in the United States over the last few years. In this case, between 1995 and 2011. What's interesting, this data is brand new, it just came. So what's interesting about this data is that it looks at all infrastructure reported to the federal government, and they tried to come up, it took a while, it took about 3 or 4 months for them to actually accumulate this from the General Accounting Office and from all the federal agencies that are associated with this. But when we look at this, what's interesting to us, if you combine higher education and K-12 education, there is more infrastructure money being spent in the United States for education than any other infrastructure in the United States, including highways. That was new to us. We had not thought it would be that way. We thought it was certainly going to be highways first, but this shows that more money is spent in the United States by states and federal government on higher education than just about any other infrastructure, including, if you'll note, up in the upper left, utilities. Very interesting stuff. Here in Wyoming, and I wanted to go from sort of this macro slide, which looks at all infrastructure being spent between the years 1995 and 2011, and this is the most recent data. We couldn't get 12 or 13. It doesn't exist in an aggregated form like that. We couldn't produce it. But this tells you about trends over time, and frankly, it's a surprise to us. But K-12 being obviously a very significant, almost $1 trillion invested there alone. So let's go to Wyoming for a second. And we have a little bit of a history. We have a very, what, did I do something wrong? My technical guy is you want to go back? Okay. Okay. Okay, I will. So, so the idea is, so that's the macro, and I want to do this correctly. So can I push it now? And it'll go to the video? I hope it does. So, how do I get it to go? Push it? Let's try. It just went on to the next slide. That's what I was worried about. Okay, so let me talk about what the video said. In Wyoming, many of you know that the state's program has been changing over time. And it's changed significantly since the 1980s into the 1990s. And in fact, there were some critical lawsuits that were developed called the Campbell suits over the last few years. And those lawsuits in that period of time, and those lawsuits looked at a variety of different things inside of the policy infrastructure that is the Wyoming education system. And the very last bit of it started to deal with the physical plant, the physical facilities, and issues related to equity associated with that. This is not unlike all the other states. I had done this function before in the state of Washington, and when we look across all the other states, there are many, many other states that had a very similar process that they had gone through, a legal process that they had gone through to get to a place where they had what we'll call an enhanced sort of education finance system. And some of them are still going through that now. In fact, a couple of the larger states have not gone through it yet. California has not gone through that. And there's a couple of other states that haven't gone through it. But many, many, many states like Wyoming had gone through it. And it reestablished sort of some policy goals and, again, some financial and funding goals to create greater equity throughout a very diverse system. You can imagine our system, 48 school districts, and each of them having a separate sort of governance structure and different focus for each of those communities. You know, in this position, I traveled to all 48 school districts in the last year, and I found one thing, many things about Wyoming and many amazing things about this great state, and one of them was the diversity of our communities. It is very different in Gillette than it is in Lusk. It is very different in Laramie 1, which is Cheyenne, than the city of Laramie, which is Albany 1. They have different histories and different places in terms of their education system and where they want their education infrastructure to go. And so this diversity is great, but it also creates, in some cases over time, over decades and decades, inequities, discrepancies. And it was in leveling those discrepancies, those inequities, that these lawsuits came from, and Wyoming was exposed to that as well. And so for the last few years, since 2002 or so, for the last 10 years, we've had a very different kind of funding system for all of our education. And the superintendent, it was great to see her again, and I hadn't seen her in a few weeks, but she mentioned recalibration, so they're recalibrating the operating costs associated with the funds that move out from the state out to the local communities. But it also looked at these suits resulted in a new structure for how we finance the infrastructure, K-12 infrastructure. This system is 25 million square feet, and for those of you that are in infrastructure, this is a fairly large system. 25 million square feet, if we take the University of Wyoming and all of their infrastructure around the state, it's about 3 times the size of the University of Wyoming. But it's dispersed in many, many, many different locations. And so it makes it a challenge for us, both in terms of financing it, but also in terms of operating and building and all of the logistics associated with that. It's a lot different. I've had 25 million square feet in one spot. It's a lot different to work with it in one spot than it is when you have it all over a state. So it's a great challenge for us as we go forward. And in Wyoming, unlike any other state in the United States, we chose to pay for what is considered 100% of the cost of the public school infrastructure. It's the only state in the United States where you don't have to pass a local bond, a local community bond, to be able to pay for those things. Now, that doesn't say that doesn't go on. There are communities that have in the past and that continue to pass local bonds to be able to do things beyond what the state will require, but it's very, very inconsistent. It's not frequent. And so we are considered the only state in the United States now that pay 100% of the cost of public school buildings and the infrastructure associated with public school buildings. And my staff would say, well, there's also enhancements and some other things. So there is local participation, but it's nothing like what is required to happen in other states. And in some states, in fact, the state doesn't provide support at all towards this. So we are in a very fortunate place. And this, let me tie it back to infrastructure for a second. The reason we can do this is because of our mineral-based economy, because of all the things that you all do. And it's one of the benefits of having a mineral-based economy. It's one of the benefits of having an energy-based economy. And it's one of the things affected when the energy economy does well, and it's one of the things affected when the energy economy does not do well. This is an important story to tell as we talk to other states about the importance of our energy economy. It isn't just about energy. It's about public schools in every single community in our state, and it's directly connected because of the way all of this had developed over the last 20 years or so. Okay, that's fundamentally what this video would have said. Let me move on. Here's what we spend. Since 2003, we were at about. Let me just walk you through the slide, get you oriented a little bit. Capital construction is the sort of the off yellow. I don't know, it looks more like, it's not really green, it's like pea soup, I guess. And then major maintenance is below, it's green. And then we have a security initiative that I'll talk about, and then operating expenses. And our operating expenses don't move too much, just because we can move money out with the same amount of people that we did. With 143 million, we generally can move out 700 million with the same number of people, so it's a fairly efficient process. But since 2003, you can see how our expenditures have moved. Got a peak there in 13-14, which we're spending through right now. When I started 2 years ago, we had $800 million in backlog, and then we were provided by the legislature. And by the way, let me just mention something very quickly. We are fortunate not only to have an energy-based economy, but we're fortunate to have a legislature and administration that supports education and that directs that energy-based economy and those revenues towards education. And that's what you see here, a result of that. One of the great things, as you know probably, about infrastructure and government infrastructure in particular, it's the physical manifestation of political will. And not a lot in government is that way. A lot what we do is invisible. You can't see it. You can't physically touch it. You can't drive to it. These schools you can. And so it has a great impact when the administrations, the legislators, the administrations make decisions to dedicate funds towards public schools. So when I started a couple of years ago, we had an $800 million backlog. The legislature provided us another $400 million on top of that. At the time that was being provided, we were spending about $5 to $7 million a month. Last month, we had a $27 million month. This month, we'll have over $30 million month. Over the next 6 months, we'll spend more than ever in the history of Wyoming towards public education and towards these buildings. Why? Because a lot of that money that had been allocated in previous years, we're spending through now. Remember, nothing ever gets spent the same year. It's not like a general fund budget. It's a capital budget, so it gets moved off 5 years, 10 years in the future. So as we proceed through this expenditure, and these are projections, the numbers aren't exact, especially in the shaded area. There's certainly projections, and we're working on our budget for this particular budget year now. And the number's not going to be $488.5 million. I don't know if there's any, oh yeah, there is a legislator, and it's not going to be $488.5, it'll be something different than that. This was a projection we did back in December with our friends over at the University of Wyoming to talk about the revenue as compared to some of the expenditures based on an algorithmic model that our friends at University of Wyoming did for both the expenditure side and the revenue side. But the idea is the numbers are inconsistent. They stay way up there, but then all of a sudden you see after 488, it falls, and it stays falling. That's expenditure, projected expenditure. The question is why, and this gets to the point that I had spoken about earlier. The program is fundamentally changing. Let me walk you through a little bit about that. So in a 25 million square foot asset, it's a 25 million square foot standardized, non-dynamic, stable asset. If you have a stable asset and you have a number of different buildings in different phases of repair, and then in overcrowding and non-overcrowding and those kinds of things, this diverse use of those buildings, and you start applying lots of dollars to this, capitalizing dollars to it, eventually you get caught up. And it's not to say that you don't continue to capitalize, but that which was backlogged in terms of repair and in terms of overcrowding, you start to get caught up. That's what this algorithmic model shows us, is that we're almost done. Not done completely, but we've done something that no other state in the United States has ever been able to do, which is to get ahead of its education infrastructure. This is of real interest to the Fed. This is one of the reasons why we had the people from Washington, D.C. coming to look at this, because no one's ever gotten here before. Wyoming leads in so many ways, and it's because of our energy-based economy that it does lead, and this is an example of it. You have wisely spent money for education over the last decades, 2 decades, and you're at a place that no other state has ever been and wishes it could be, where you're at a place where you truly have world-class educational facilities for future Wyomingites. It's an amazing place. A lot of you deserve a lot of credit for that. So do our legislators and administrations. So that's kind of a hard landing. 488 expenditure and then 187 million in expenditure. So we're going to soften that landing a little bit, and the legislature is pretty happy about that when I start talking about that. So we're working on the numbers now, but we're going to try and give it a little bit of a softer landing than this, and that'll help with this deviation between our revenues coming in that someone had mentioned earlier and our expenditures that are on top. We use more of the energy economy here than probably just about any other state agency. It's one of the reasons why Superintendent Balo was referring to that. We're one of the smallest agencies with one of the largest budgets because we're focused on designing and building the best schools possible. Here's what we do. This is just planning projects going on right now. 47 projects are currently in planning, and we have about 85 projects that are currently in design. And right now in construction in the state of Wyoming, this is just major capital, 79 projects currently underway. Again, the largest volume of production in our history, and they're in every county and they're in every school district. And we really haven't missed anyone in terms of working with those local school boards, working with those local communities in planning, designing, and building schools. If I add in all the other minor capital and major capital projects, we run probably a couple hundred projects at any one given time. So we're busy. We have 15 people. They're all project managers, architects, engineers, and they're all very, very busy. And so are our school districts with regards to this. And so you'll see these schools going up in all of your communities. Here in Laramie, you'll see one off the 25 as you travel north, which is Prairie Wind. When you go out to Laramie, you'll see the brand new Laramie High School, $98 million high school, the second largest in our history, or second most expensive in our history, going up off of Highway 80 as you look to the right as you enter into Laramie, going west, and on and on and on, even in Gillette. Many, many schools going up because they have a great school board, they have a great community, and a great legislative team. So we're changing. 25 million square feet, and over the last few years, you've invested about $3.5 billion in this asset. And for us, it really is about capitalizing this asset. Well, as we approach this new place, we're going to start preserving the $3.5 billion investment that was there and emphasize preservation. Continue to build schools where they are needed because of capacity, meaning overcrowding. Continue to build schools where there is disrepair and we need to fix them or we need to replace them. We shall continue all of that. But we will begin to also take care of those that are currently on the ground, new schools or reasonably new schools from that last $3.5 billion investment to assure that we get a long life out of this infrastructure. We design these buildings for 50 years. Some we try and design for 60. We never get there. 50, it's hard. You have to invest in maintenance. You have to invest in preventative maintenance to get them to extend that long. And frankly, we have some that'll last a lot longer than that, or that have been required to last a lot longer than that and really do need replacement. But we've been vigilant about that. And so, again, so we're going to move off to asset preservation more and more. It doesn't mean we're not going to do capitalization. We'll continue to that, but we'll also preserve the asset. So I have a focused mission. It's this. And Superintendent Balo has, and all the teachers across the state, all the superintendents and all the school boards have an amazing mission. And I am really proud to be able to be working with this administration, working with Governor Mead, who I think you'll see in a few minutes here, working with this legislative team. I think I've met, well, many of them are new, but at least of the last ones, I think I met them all. I think I met all 92. And I'm going to try, and I'm meeting now the new ones that are coming on board. I have a great respect for what I don't know, and to learn about Wyoming is to talk to its people. It's to visit its communities, and it's to understand really the diversity of Wyoming. It is not the same place from corner to corner. It's very different. And so we have a focused mission to deliver to those diverse communities. And so I'm very proud to be able to have the opportunity to be here in Wyoming, to work for the administration, where Governor Mead, to work with the legislature in these communities at not only capitalizing these assets, these really critical assets to the future of these communities, but to preserve them as well. And again, I want to thank Lloyd, and I want to thank the WIA for allowing us the opportunity to just give you a quick briefing about this beneficiary to the energy economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. So we're going to take some questions from the board. And we have none. What about from the audience? Got one here.
Bill, thank you for a great presentation, as well as that from the superintendent. One of the slides that came up referenced the the Green Building Council, and I was curious, in the design and planning of facilities, the extent to which you are in actuality deploying green standards, all the way from HVAC systems to new glass designs for windows, et cetera.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I appreciate it. We have, because of the volume that we're moving through right now, we have not only a desire to develop design guidelines and to use standards that are more green focused and that are more sustainable focused, but a responsibility to do that. And our communities have been very open to that concept of using both sustainable materials and then sustainable construction methods. And as much as possible, we use heat pumps and other technologies that are able to do that. Our teams have all been through that kind of, have those skill sets and are able to deploy those, particularly our architectural and engineering teams that we hire across the state are very focused on that, and we continue to talk about that and will continue in the future. We're also, the governor has an energy initiative. School facilities is part of that energy initiative. We're proud to be, and so we've got a number of things that we're moving forward with. In fact, I had a conversation with Rita Meyer last week, who's with Rocky Mountain Power, and she's forming a coalition of all of the power companies to come and speak with me next week about the amount of energy. You can imagine how much power we use. This is 25 million square feet, and it's active, and not just active during the day, it's active at night and active all weekend. We are a big power user, and so they want to talk to us about further ways that we can help to not only build our buildings and design them with that in mind, but also operate them with that in mind as we go forward. It's a great question.
And we do have a question here.
Yeah, hey Bill, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, just along those lines, you might have heard people talk about Section 111D. It's EPA's proposed CO2 emission regulations for existing coal power plants.
Yes.
And some of the four-pronged strategies they have for helping states get to this reduction level is reducing end-use energy consumption.
Right.
So given the large footprint you have and the large energy consumption you just had, has anybody talked to you about opportunities to really look at energy efficient lighting and some of the things that Tom talked about to help get some end-use efficiency gains to help the state towards that new EPA regulation that may come down?
Yeah, so in light of that, and certainly the previous regulations as well, as I said, our architectural teams, engineering teams, our standards, our design guidelines are all focused towards that. And the outcome is that we have LED lighting and we have, like I said, other technologies that we're doing, heat pumps and other kinds of things. We use a lot of daylighting now in our designs, and it takes a lot less light. I don't know if you've ever been in a school built in the 70s and a school built today. They're completely different. Next time, notice that. Notice our daylighting, especially in the common areas. We use a lot less lighting than we previously had needed. And so we're doing a lot of those things in our designs, and not just in our construction materials that we use, but in our designs. There's more that we can do, and so that's why this dialogue is so important. So important that we have with the power companies is to be able to have a more comprehensive dialogue. Should we do an assessment of the entire system? If so, how? And as we go through. There was one thing that I didn't mention, I think, that was on here was school security and safety, and I think it was one of those bar graphs that were there. The governor's office and the legislature is I just wanted to mention this, very focused on safety and security throughout our schools. We've just completed an assessment of all 25, this is what reminded me, an assessment of all 25 million square feet, and we'll be providing the legislature with an much better, probably the best understanding ever of where we need to invest in infrastructure associated with school security and safety. Anyway, back to this, I think, do we need an assessment of the system, and that kind of a dialogue will go on with the power companies as we go forward, and we're happy to do it. I think it's a great opportunity. By the way, one of the other things I keep reminding folks when we talk about energy efficiency in public schools is we are an education entity. The superintendent of public instruction is the leader of that education entity here, and so we're really good at learning new things, and our system is really good at absorbing it, especially not just with our administration and with the building of infrastructure, but inside of our classrooms. It's an extremely effective resource capacity that is there, and that's our students. And so they can further this concept in their schools and help us with these kinds of ideas as we go forward. Think about the science projects that could come out of taking the schools at particular grade levels as part of a curriculum and have them do energy efficiency audits of their schools. That would be, and projects in their schools. That would be awesome. So that's a great question. Thank you.
Well, Bill, you're a good man. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And please stick around for some hors d'oeuvres and refreshments, please.
Thank you.
And to hear Tom Dennis give a DC update. So let's give Bill a hand, please.
Thank you very much.